This is the very first time I've ever recorded one of these videos in a car. But I've got a funeral in a few minutes that I've got to go to, and I got to squeeze this in because it all has to happen pretty quickly. And it actually makes some sense that I'm sitting in a car because the topic of this particular video is the engine of Hinduism. There are 5 videos that make up the Hinduism unit, and you can watch them in any order you want to. Just make sure you watch all 5 of them. The engine of Hinduism, no matter who you are as a Hindu, we'll say the vast majority, 95% or more of the Hindus of the world, their basic interest is about what happens in the next world. There are a few pieces that go together to create this system. The first is an assumption. It's a bottom line assumption that there is built into all reality a cycle. You can think of cycles like the cycle of the year. You have spring, summer, fall, winter, but then you have spring, summer, fall, and winter. You can think of the cycles of the day, morning, afternoon, evening, night, morning, afternoon, evening, night. You can think of the cycles of the moon, the cycles of the year, the cycles of everything that's around us, even the cycle of life. And Hinduism says, against that backdrop, it makes a lot of sense that there's a cycle for us, for all sentient reality as well. They call this Samsara, the cycle of rebirth. Now, we like to think of the word reincarnation, and that'll be all right for us when we're talking about Hinduism. Later on, when we get to Buddhism, you want to be careful because it's not quite the same thing, even though they use the same word samsara. But nonetheless, the cycle that one is born, lives a life, dies, and again is born, lives a life, and dies. In the West, we have a different assumption, but it is an assumption, and that assumption is that you're born into this world, you die, and if there's more, it goes on someplace else in another realm. Hinduism sees it all happening as a closed package. With that in mind, you know that you're going to come back. That's the basic idea. So, the purpose of the religion is largely speaking to help you get in a good place the next time around. What determines your placement in the next world is karma. Karma is the moral fiber or residue or dust that sticks to you as a result of all of the actions that you carry out in this world. Every moral choice, every ethical decision you make has karmic dust that clings to you. And after you die, that karmic dust exerts influence. There is no way to escape the idea that what we do has consequences. We think what goes around comes around. Only for Hinduism, it doesn't always happen within the context of this life. There has to be another way for it to keep processing out. You cannot do evil and not have some consequence later on. It's almost the law of physics. And so Hinduism says, rather than a judgment, it's just built into nature. Just like it's built into nature, if I drop an apple, it's going to hit the ground. So in Hinduism, if I act immorally, if I act unethically, it's going to have negative consequences later on. There isn't a God that metes out judgment. Whatever judgment, if you want to call it that I get, comes as a direct result of the law of karma. And then finally, there's this notion of caste that says that we're born somewhere on a scale of life. Now, in that scale of life, people think of the caste system quickly as those 4 levels of human experience. The highest, of course, would be to be a Brahmin priest. And the next level down below that would be born into the nobility class. And underneath that comes all the merchants and all of those other people who are well-to-do, the Bill Gateses of the world. But then underneath that comes the vast majority of us, the plebes, the everyday workers, the folks who sweep the streets and work on the docks and sew in the factories. But caste is much bigger than that. Caste is not just 4 levels of human beings. Within those 4 levels, there's an immense array of possibilities. Being born into that merchant class is not a single experience. There are different kinds of things within that one might be born into. And the idea is that you very rarely can move beyond the level you're born into within the context of this world. Think of the person who grows up in a very poor neighborhood. The odds are they're going to end up being very poor for their life. Once in a while, somebody breaks out of it, but for the most part, that's what you're born into, and what you can hope for as a Hindu is to try to set yourself up so that the next time you're born into a better neighborhood, you're born into a better family, you're born into a better set of circumstances. Perhaps you're born into the kind of family that allows you to get an education so that you can move on up in the world. But the human levels aren't all there is to this. Oh, there's one other human level, by the way. It's the outcasts. Called outcasts in the West, multiple names in Hinduism for it, but basically they're the people that don't even quite get on the system. They're the people who do things like clean toilets or deal with dead folks and that sort of thing. Things that make them just ritually impure by virtue of their very existence. And still we're not done. So here's how the system would work if you put it all together. I'm going to be born again, so I spend this life, and let's say I'm born into an upper merchant level. But then let's say I act like a complete turd, and I completely treat people badly, I steal from people, I abuse people verbally or whatever. Next time around, my karmic dust is going to weigh me down, so that I might be born not on a merchant level of any sort. I might be pulled all the way down to the plebe level and have to do one of those everyday jobs. But if I'm even worse, if my karmic dust that clings to me is even worse, because I've not only abused people verbally, but perhaps violently, perhaps I've killed people, perhaps I engineered something terrible that caused a whole lot of people to die, then it's possible that my karmic dust will pull me down so far that I end up off the human scale altogether, and end up some animal down there. Maybe a cow. That wouldn't be too bad. That's at the very top of the animal level. But maybe it's even further down than that. Maybe I become a goat, or a dog, or a pig, or a cockroach. You can work yourself gradually down by living a life that fails to fulfill your own duty. And you can work yourself gradually up by living a life that does fulfill your duty. So, over the course of many lifetimes, a person can end up becoming something low. But over the course of many lifetimes, you can end up moving all the way up to the human level, to the top of the human level, and even beyond that. Because even the gods are a part of this caste system. And as the universe collapses and a new universe begins, cycles, you can think of the Big Bang and the big implosion and a new Big Bang. Who's going to run that show? Who are the gods in that particular moment of the universe? And the answer is it could be the person who works themselves up. But nothing is permanent. Everything continues to change. And the last piece to throw out about this is how to know about your duty. In Hinduism, there are a lot of ways to talk about how to know what to do, but the number one central book that gives definition to what your duty is, for what your particular role is, what your particular caste is, it's all encapsulated in the Laws of Manu. It was published about 2,000 years ago, and it's a collection that describes all of the different things, what clothes you're supposed to wear, what names you're supposed to use, who you're supposed to marry, what your actions are supposed to be, all dependent upon what caste you were born into. And if there's any question at all as to whether I'm allowed to do this as a merchant, the Laws of Manu seeks to clarify it. So, you have Samsara, the cycle of life. You have karma, the dust that clings to you. You have caste, the level you're born into each time. And the last part is, you have dharma, the duty that's defined for you in the Laws of Manu. That's the engine of Hinduism.